$50 million reduced to ashes. That was the ultimate price paid for one vicious whisper. When socialite Vanessa Caldwell leaned in close and told the underworld's most brilliant financial queen that she was simply too big for a mafia king, she crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She had signed her own brutal death warrant. Harlow Sinclair never apologized for the space she took up in any room. In a hidden world ruled by razor-thin trophy wives, silicone perfection, and men who treated women like interchangeable accessories, Harlow was an anomaly. She was a deeply fat woman whose lush, unapologetic figure commanded attention the moment her Louboutins struck marble. But her size was only part of what made her formidable. She possessed the sharpest financial mind on the entire eastern seaboard. Harlow ran the Velvet Ledger, an ultra-exclusive, completely off-the-books banking system that washed millions for the most dangerous cartels, syndicates, and corrupt politicians in the country. People did not merely respect Harlow, they feared her. She held the account numbers, the offshore routing codes, and the buried secrets of every powerful man from New York to Miami. Yet even with that terrifying influence, the social politics of the Mafia wives remained painfully shallow. Behind manicured hands, the wives of underbosses and capos whispered. They sneered at her size, unable to understand how a woman who wore a size 22 could wield more power than all their husbands combined. Dante Valenti did not care about the whispers. As the newly crowned head of the Valenti syndicate, he was a man carved from ice and violence. He was devastatingly handsome, with dark, calculating eyes that missed nothing. When his father was assassinated, Dante seized control of the family empire with ruthless efficiency that left the streets painted in blood. Behind that iron fist, however, lived a quiet, consuming obsession with Harlow. Their relationship was an unspoken, fiercely guarded secret. To the outside world, they were strictly business associates. Harlow managed the Valenti family's illicit wealth, turning millions in racketeering money into legitimate real estate investments. But behind the reinforced steel doors of Dante's penthouse, the dynamic shifted completely. Dante worshipped her. He worshipped the soft curve of her hips, the sharp bite of her intellect, and the way she never flinched when he walked into a room covered in another man's blood. To him, Harlow was not merely beautiful. She was a goddess seated on a throne of dirty money. Secrecy, however, breeds opportunists. Enter Vanessa Caldwell. She was the heir to Caldwell Heritage, a global luxury PR, and modeling empire that catered to the ultra-rich. She was everything society deemed perfect: tall, statuesque, blonde, and devastatingly thin. Vanessa was also completely devoid of a moral compass. For years, she had used her high-fashion import channels to smuggle conflict diamonds and military-grade weaponry for the Volkov Bratva, a fierce rival of the Valenti family. She had set her sights on Dante Valenti. In her twisted, arrogant mind, becoming his wife would crown her the undisputed queen of the city. She believed a man of Dante's stature required a woman who looked like her on his arm. A beautiful, fragile-looking bird to offset his violent nature. She viewed Harlow as nothing more than an oversized bookkeeper, a glorified secretary Dante tolerated solely out of financial necessity. The tension had been building for months. Vanessa made it a point to undermine Harlow at every high society gala, charity auction, and underground casino opening. She offered passive-aggressive comments about Harlow's diet, accidentally spilled champagne on her custom dresses, and loudly wondered why Dante did not hire a more presentable face for his front companies. Harlow, a woman who regularly negotiated truces between warring cartels, usually let the petty insults slide. She knew her worth. She knew what happened in Dante's bed. and she knew the exact net worth of Vanessa's heavily leveraged company. But the constant chipping away at her physical appearance touched an old, deeply buried vulnerability. Growing up heavy in a world that demanded thinness had left scars, and Vanessa knew exactly how to press her perfectly manicured nails into those wounds. The tipping point came at the clandestine winter solstice gala hosted at the Valentia estate, a sprawling fortified mansion in the snow-covered hills of upstate New York. It was the premier event of the underworld, where multi-million-dollar drug routes were negotiated over beluga caviar and vintage champagne. Harlow arrived looking breathtaking. She wore a custom-tailored deep emerald velvet gown that plunged at the neckline and hugged every lush curve of her body. Rubies rested against her collarbones, a silent gift from Dante that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. As she glided down the grand staircase, conversations paused. Dante stood across the ballroom flanked by his terrifying lieutenants, Dominic and Silas. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. When his eyes locked onto Harlow, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The possessive dark hunger in his gaze was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. But Vanessa Caldwell was not paying attention to Dante's eyes. She was focused on her own bruised ego. She had spent the evening trying to corner him, leveraging her European fashion contacts to propose a mutually beneficial partnership. Dante had dismissed her with barely a glance, his attention drifting back to the emerald-clad woman holding court near the high-stakes baccarat tables. Humiliated and fueled by an expensive cocktail of cocaine and arrogance, Vanessa decided that if she could not win Dante's attention with business, she would systematically destroy the woman holding it. Around midnight, Harlow excused herself to the estate's sprawling East Wing powder room to reapply her lipstick. The room was a lavish display of gold leaf mirrors and rose-colored marble. As she leaned over the sink, blotting deep crimson onto her lips, the heavy oak door clicked shut and locked. Vanessa stood leaning against the doorframe, a venomous, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She looked like a runway model wrapped in silver sequins, but her eyes held the malice of a starving predator. "You look exhausted, Penny," she purred, stepping further into the room. She deliberately looked Harlow up and down, her gaze lingering on the swell of her stomach and the curve of her thighs beneath the velvet. "Carrying all that weight around all night. It must be terrible for your joints." Harlow did not flinch. She capped her lipstick, slipped it into her clutch, and met Vanessa's gaze through the mirror. "Vanessa, if you're looking for another line of credit to float your failing winter collection, my office hours are Monday through Friday. Right now, you're interrupting my evening." Vanessa's smile tightened, her perfectly contoured cheeks flushing with sudden anger. "Your office, please. Don't act like you're anything more than a glorified accountant who eats her feelings. Do you honestly think anyone here respects you? Do you think Dante respects you?" Harlow turned slowly, crossing her arms over her chest. "I think Dante respects the $80 million I laundered for him last quarter. Now step out of my way." Vanessa did not move. Instead, she took a step closer, invading Harlow's personal space. The scent of her expensive floral perfume was nauseatingly strong. "He uses you, Harlow, because you're smart with numbers, but don't ever confuse utility with desire." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh, jagged whisper meant to inflict maximum damage. "Look in the mirror. Look at yourself, and then look at me. Men like Dante Valenti conquer the world. They want a prize on their arm. You're too big for him. You're too fat to ever be anything more than the dirty little secret he keeps in the basement." Silence suffocated the powder room. For a fraction of a second, the words hit exactly where Vanessa intended. A brief flash of pain flickered behind Harlow's eyes. It was the eternal, exhausting cruelty of a world that refused to see her brilliance because it was too busy judging her circumference. But Harlow Sinclair was not a victim. She straightened her spine, her expression morphing into a mask of pure, terrifying authority. "Are you finished?" Before Vanessa could fire back another insult, a heavy thud echoed from the adjoining sitting room. The private VIP lounge connected to the powder room. The connecting door, which had been slightly ajar, swung open. Dante Valenti stepped out of the shadows. He did not look angry. He looked completely, violently hollow, the kind of emotionless calm that usually preceded a massacre. He had stepped into the adjoining room minutes earlier to take a private call and had heard every single word. Vanessa gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. Her face drained of all color. The silver sequins of her dress suddenly looked like armor far too thin. "Dante, I didn't know you were in there." Dante did not look at Vanessa. His dark, dangerous eyes went straight to Harlow. He saw the slight tightening of her jaw, the defensive posture of her shoulders. He saw the woman he loved, the woman who held his empire together with her bare hands, being reduced to an ugly high school insult by someone who was not worthy to breathe the same air. "Harlow." Dante's voice was a low, rough rumble. "Wait for me by the cars." Harlow held his gaze for a long moment. She saw the lethal promise burning in his irises. She did not argue. She picked up her clutch, walked right past a trembling Vanessa without a second glance, and exited the room. Once the door clicked shut behind her, Dante finally turned his full attention to the blonde heiress. Vanessa tried to force a seductive smile, desperately attempting to salvage the situation. "Dante, darling, you have to understand. I was just giving her some friendly advice." Dante closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides. He did not hit her. He did not touch her. He simply crowded her into the marble sink, towering over her until she was forced to lean back against the cold mirror, gasping for air. "Caldwell Heritage," Dante whispered, his voice dangerously soft. 16 warehouses down by the docks, 2 flagship stores in Manhattan. A global distribution network heavily leveraged by offshore loans from the Volkov family. Vanessa's breath hitched. Her eyes widened in absolute terror. How? How do you— Babsho, you think you're untouchable because you're thin?" Dante asked, a dark, mocking smirk twisting his lips. "You think bone structure protects you from a bullet? Harlow owns your debt, Vanessa. She bought it some time ago. She owns your warehouses. She owns your flagship stores. I let her do it because she thought it was good business." He leaned in until his mouth was inches from Vanessa's ear. "But I don't care about business anymore. You insulted my queen, and now you're going to watch your entire empire burn to the ground." Dante stepped back, adjusting his cuffs with terrifying nonchalance. "Get your coat, Vanessa. The night is about to get very, very cold for you." As Dante walked out of the powder room, leaving Vanessa sobbing hysterically against the marble sink, a terrifying sequence of events was already in motion. He pulled his burner phone from his pocket and dialed his most ruthless lieutenant. "Silas," he commanded, his voice echoing through the opulent halls. "Round up the men. Bring the gasoline. We are going to erase Caldwell Heritage from the face of the earth tonight." Gasoline poured over imported French silk creates a distinct, sickeningly sweet odor right before the first spark catches. Down by the industrial waterfront, 16 heavily fortified warehouses owned by Caldwell Heritage stood silently in the freezing night. Inside those corrugated steel walls rested the entirety of Vanessa's heavily leveraged empire. Millions of dollars in haute couture garments, crates of smuggled blood diamonds from Sierra Leone, and untraceable military-grade hardware destined for the Volkov Bratva. Silas stood near the loading docks in a tailored charcoal overcoat, watching his crew meticulously douse the perimeter. He flicked his gold DuPont lighter, letting the flame dance for a fraction of a second before tossing it onto the soaked concrete. Fire roared to life with the force of a detonating bomb. The flames scaled the sides of the buildings, shattering reinforced glass and devouring the roof lines. Sirens began to wail in the distance, but the local precincts were firmly on the Valenti family payroll. The fire trucks would inexplicably take the longest possible routes, ensuring nothing but ash remained by the time they arrived. Miles away in her sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, Vanessa awoke to the shrill ringing of her private encrypted cell phone. Her hands trembled as she snatched it from the marble nightstand. It was her head of security. "Miss Caldwell!" The man barked over the chaotic sound of roaring flames and collapsing steel. "The waterfront depositories, all of them, they're gone. The crew was heavily armed and professional. We lost everything." Vanessa felt the blood drain from her face. The phone slipped from her manicured fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized her chest. She sprinted to her home office, ripping open her laptop to access her offshore corporate accounts. If she could just liquidate her emergency shadow funds, she could appease the Volkovs for the lost weapons and flee to Europe before Dante could find her. Her perfectly contoured face fell in sheer, unadulterated horror as the banking portal loaded. Account frozen. Asset seizure in progress. Contact beneficiary. The Velvet Ledger. "No!" Vanessa gasped, frantically slamming her manicured nails against the keyboard. "No, no, no!" She dialed the direct line to her private wealth manager at UBS in Geneva. The phone rang 6 times before a tired voice answered. "Vanessa, you shouldn't be calling this line. Not after tonight. What did you do?" "Where are my funds?" Vanessa screamed, her high society poise completely shattering. "Who authorized the seizure without my biometric clearance? You leveraged your entire supply chain against loans from shell corporations, Vanessa," the banker replied, his tone laced with pity and fear. "Those shell companies were subsidiaries of the Velvet Ledger. When the collateral, your warehouses, burned down, the smart contracts triggered an immediate automated margin call. Harlow Sinclair executed the clauses. She owns your liquid assets. Assets, your personal real estate, your flagship stores, everything. You are bankrupt, Vanessa. Do not call this number again." The line went dead. Vanessa collapsed into her leather executive chair, sobbing hysterically. The harsh reality crashed down upon her. Harlow had not merely been managing the Valenti family's money. She had been actively weaving a financial web around Vanessa's business for months, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to snap the trap shut. Vanessa had foolishly mistaken Harlow's silence for weakness and her heavy figure for a lack of discipline, completely blind to the fact that she was dealing with an apex predator. Desperation breeds reckless decisions. Vanessa grabbed her coat and sprinted down to the underground parking garage to retrieve her Aston Martin. She had one last lifeline: Alexei Volkov. If she could reach the Russian syndicate leader at his private club in Tribeca, she could offer him the Valenti family's operational secrets in exchange for protection and a loan. She drove erratically through the empty, snow-dusted streets of Manhattan, running red lights until she violently screeched to a halt outside the heavily guarded doors of the Volkov Club. She threw her keys at a bewildered valet and stormed past the massive bouncers, who oddly made no move to stop her. Vanessa burst into the VIP lounge, her blonde hair disheveled, her sequined dress torn at the hem. Alexei Volkov sat in a plush leather booth surrounded by his lieutenants, but he was not alone. Sitting across from the terrifying Russian mobster, calmly sipping a glass of Macallan 25, was Harlow. She was still wearing the breathtaking emerald velvet gown, her lush curves draped elegantly over the booth's upholstery. She looked perfectly relaxed, the picture of absolute unbothered authority. Behind her stood Dante, his hand resting possessively on the back of Harlow's neck, his dark eyes tracking Vanessa like a sniper locking onto a target. "Alexei, please," Vanessa sobbed, throwing herself toward the table. "They burned my shipments. They took my money. You have to protect me. I can give you Dante's shipping manifests. I can—" Volkov raised a massive, heavily tattooed hand, silencing her instantly. He did not look angry. He looked amused. He glanced at Harlow. "Is this the woman who called you fat, Tishka?" Harlow took a slow, deliberate sip of her whiskey, her crimson lips leaving a perfect imprint on the crystal glass. "That's the one, Alexei. Though considering she currently has a net worth of -40 million, her opinions hold significantly less weight than they did an hour ago." Volkov let out a booming laugh that rattled the glasses on the table. He looked back at Vanessa with absolute disdain. "You arrogant, stupid girl. Harlow just restructured my cartel's entire European money laundering pipeline through Deutsche Bank. She saved me millions in federal luxury taxes. You lost my weapons in a fire. Why would I protect a bankrupt liability when I am doing business with a financial genius?" Vanessa fell to her knees right there in the VIP lounge. The cold, hard floor bruised her kneecaps, but she barely felt it. She was completely surrounded by monsters, and she had just realized she had mocked the queen who controlled them all. "Dante," Vanessa begged, tears ruining her expensive makeup and leaving black tracks down her cheeks. "Please, have mercy. I'll leave the country. I'll disappear." Dante stepped out from behind the booth. He walked slowly toward her, his polished leather shoes stopping inches from her trembling hands. He stared down at her, not with anger, but with absolute disgust. "You told Harlow she was too big for me," Dante murmured, his voice a lethal vibrating bass that sent chills down the spines of every hardened criminal in the room. "You thought my empire required a fragile, starving ornament to stand beside me. You failed to understand that a king doesn't want a porcelain doll. A king requires an equal, someone who can hold the weight of the crown without breaking." Dante crouched down, forcing Vanessa to meet his gaze. "Harlow is my empire. She is the blood in the veins of the Valenti family. And you? You are nothing but ash. Run, Vanessa. Run far away. Because if I ever see your face in this city again, I will not be as forgiving as the fire." The penthouse was eerily quiet when Dante and Harlow finally returned. The sprawling duplex overlooking the glittering skyline of Manhattan was a sanctuary of dark wood, imported Italian marble, and bulletproof floor-to-ceiling windows. Harlow kicked off her Louboutins, sighing as her bare feet hit the plush Persian rug. The adrenaline of the night was finally beginning to ebb, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. She walked over to the massive mahogany bar and poured herself a splash of sparkling water. She could feel Dante's eyes on her, heavy and constant. He moved silently across the room, wrapping his large, warm hands around her waist from behind. He pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, breathing in the scent of her expensive vanilla perfume. "You were magnificent tonight," Dante whispered against her skin, his lips pressing a soft kiss just below her jawline. "Watching you dismantle that pathetic woman's life with a few keystrokes, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Harlow leaned back into his solid frame, her hands resting over his. Despite her fierce display of power at the club, the ugly words Vanessa had hissed in the powder room still lingered like a shadow at the back of her mind. "You're too big for him. You're too fat to ever be anything more than the dirty little secret." "Dante?" Harlow started, her voice unusually quiet. She turned in his arms, looking up into his dark, searching eyes. "What she said tonight, about how society views us, about how men in your position are expected to have a certain type of woman." Dante's expression hardened instantly. He did not let her finish. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently sweeping across her cheekbones. "Do not let the venom of a ruined woman poison your mind, Harlow," he said fiercely. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then down to the deep plunge of her velvet dress, taking in the full, lush curves of her body with undisguised reverence. "I despise the fragile plastic women in our circle. I despise their empty conversations and their hollow ambitions. I crave you, every soft inch of you, your brilliant mind, your ruthless heart, and a body that actually feels like a woman when I hold her." He kissed her then, a deep, consuming kiss that tasted of scotch, danger, and absolute devotion. Harlow melted into the embrace, the last remnants of her insecurity burning away under the heat of his touch. He worshipped her form, his hands mapping the curves of her hips, silently reinforcing everything his words had promised. She was not a secret. She was the undisputed Donna of the Valenti family. The following morning, the financial world of New York woke up to a seismic shift. The headlines of the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg reported the sudden catastrophic collapse of Caldwell Heritage. The narrative fed to the public was a tragic tale of over-leveraged assets and a devastating warehouse fire caused by faulty industrial wiring. Vanessa Caldwell was spotted boarding a commercial flight to a small coastal town in South America, her designer luggage replaced by 2 modest duffel bags, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. She had been erased from the elite social registry overnight. At the Valenti Syndicate's highly anticipated summer solstice gala at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan, the grand ballroom was packed with politicians, judges, and the heads of rival families, all eager to pay their respects to Dante. The whispers that usually permeated the room were entirely absent. Everyone had heard the ghost stories of what happened to Vanessa Caldwell. Everyone knew who held the real power behind the Valenti throne. The massive gilded doors of the ballroom swung open. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Dante walked in dressed in a flawless midnight blue tuxedo, but he was not walking ahead of his entourage. He was walking shoulder to shoulder with Harlow. She wore a custom, breathtaking gown made of spun gold that clung unapologetically to her heavy, lush figure. She radiated confidence, diamonds glittering at her throat, her head held high. Dante did not hide her in the shadows. He proudly escorted her to the center of the room, his hand resting firmly on the swell of her waist. As the most powerful men in the country lined up to kiss her hand and beg for favorable interest rates on their illicit loans. Harlow smiled. She had built an empire on numbers, washed their blood-stained money, and conquered the man who conquered the city. She took up space fiercely and unapologetically, proving once and for all that in a world of ruthless kings, the woman holding the ledger always wears the heaviest crown. If this story of mafia intrigue, razor-sharp revenge, high-stakes financial warfare, and unapologetic romance stirred something in you, show your love by hitting that like button, sharing it with fellow romance lovers, and subscribing while ringing the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling underworld tale. Your support helps us create more stories where brilliant women claim their rightful thrones.